The valley was peaceful, untouched by the chaos of human settlement. Birds, though not quite like the ones Earth had left behind, flitted from branch to branch, their bodies shimmering like opal in the twilight. The air hummed with the life of Porteus, a world still fresh, unscarred by human ambition, yet soon to be marked by the indelible fingerprints of Earth's desperate survivors. Dr. Ellie Marlowe stood knee-deep in the valley's lush, emerald grass, her gaze fixed on the intricate vines creeping up the nearest tree. She could feel the alien pulse of the plant, almost as if it was alive, watching her. The surface shimmered with faint violet streaks, the only indication that something beyond the ordinary was at work here. The Loresians had promised her team that these plants could reshape entire ecosystems, reverse desertification, restore Earth's failing environment. In theory, they were supposed to be humanity's salvation. In reality, they were about to become something far worse. Marlowe bent closer to examine the vine, her gloved fingers skimming over its smooth, alien surface. She couldn't help but marvel at the way it seemed to hum with a rhythm of its own, almost like a heartbeat. Imagine, she murmured, a world where plants don't just survive, they control everything. The idea was thrilling. If these creatures were indeed capable of transforming entire ecosystems with a mere thought, humanity might just find its salvation on Porteus. Careful there, Dr. Marlowe warned Lieutenant Aaron Walker, the gruff head of the security detail. His voice cracked with the sharpness of someone who had been on too many missions and had seen just a little too much. You sure these things are as harmless as you say? Ellie glanced over at Aaron. He was scanning the perimeter, his hand near the trigger of his weapon. There was something in his eyes that suggested he wasn't so convinced that these plants were harmless. Ellie had spent years studying alien biology, and while there were many unknowns about the flora of Porteus, she knew the science. At least, she thought she did. But the doubt in Aaron's gaze made her second-guess herself. I've seen the data, Aaron. These plants are the key to saving Earth. We just need to. Before she could finish, there was a sudden snap. The air thickened with a low hum. Ellie looked up in alarm as the ground beneath her feet began to tremble, the plants around her starting to twitch as if they were waking from a deep slumber. Aaron, she called, but her voice was lost in the rising cacophony. In the next moment, the vines shot out from the ground with the speed of a striking cobra, wrapping around her legs, pulling her downward. Ellie gasped, trying to pull free, but the vine held fast, its grip tightening around her ankle like a vice. Aaron, she screamed, but there was no answer. The ground beneath her crumbled as the plants began to weave themselves together, constructing a thick, unyielding net. It was like a trap. Not for prey but for her. Ellie struggled against the invasive roots, her heart racing as panic began to take hold. She kicked, squirmed, tried to reach for her cutting tool, but the vines were too quick, too strong. There was no logic to it. No reason. The plants seemed to react to her as if they knew she was a threat. Shit. Shit, 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 Ellie muttered, her breath coming in sharp bursts. She felt like a mouse caught in a maze, except the walls were made of living, breathing alien matter. Was this part of the plan? Was this the regenerative wonder that could reshape ecosystems? She had to admit this was not the way she envisioned it. Just then, a shimmering presence appeared before her, cutting through the darkening haze of panic. A figure tall, slender, translucent skin that gleamed with an inner light. It was a Loresian, one of the natives of the planet. The alien extended a hand towards her, its fingers moving with deliberate grace. Ellie felt her heart lurch. They were real, the alien's voice echoed in her mind, as clear as if it had been spoken aloud. Humans. Always so quick to touch what they do not understand. Ellie's eyes went wide with recognition. It was Leora, the leader of the Loresian delegation, the one who had warned them that the planet was not a simple garden to be cultivated for human profit. The one who had said that nature here could not be tamed. Leora's lips quirked into a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. You don't understand, do you? These are not just plants. They are us. Ellie's throat tightened. What do you mean? These plants do not grow. They evolve. They react. You've introduced your technology and your pollutants into the soil. Now, they defend themselves. Leora's eyes flashed with an emotion that could only be described as disappointment. Then, can you stop them? Ellie gasped, her limbs numb with the effort to stay upright. Leora raised a hand, and the vines immediately loosened their grip. The ground beneath Ellie seemed to breathe, exhaling a faint, cool mist. For a moment, Ellie was sure she was going to faint. The plants pulled back, retreating into the earth as though they had never moved at all. Ellie stumbled backward, her breath coming in labored gasps. Leora was still there, floating above the ground like a shimmering specter. You should never have come here, earthlings, Leora intoned, her voice carrying an edge that made the air feel thick. Porteus is not yours to tame. We have warned you. But you do not listen. Ellie stood, her knees shaking. We didn't know. We thought we could work together. Your kind does not work together. It conquers. It destroys. Before Ellie could respond, Leora turned and began to drift away, vanishing into the ether as silently as she had appeared. The next few days passed in a blur for Ellie. The research facility, once brimming with hope and scientific ambition, had turned into a ghost town of hushed whispers and nervous eyes. The Loresians' warning had struck a blow to their pride and their hopes. The data that had seemed so promising was now suspect, tainted by the first real proof that they had underestimated the planet's true nature. Still, there was no turning back. Earth's migration to Porteus had already begun in earnest. The colonists, humanity's last hope, were settling into their new home with growing optimism that things would get better. But Ellie knew the truth now. There was a storm coming, one that no technology, no matter how advanced, could stop, and she wasn't sure how much longer they had before the Loresians decided they were no longer willing to tolerate their presence on the planet. Ellie spent the next few days running on adrenaline and desperation, the chill of Leora's warning still clinging to her thoughts. It wasn't just the plants that had taken a turn for the worse, but the entire situation. The ecosystem wasn't something that could be tamed or fixed with a few tweaks of human technology. It was a living, breathing thing, a thing far older and more complex than anything humanity had ever encountered. And it was responding to the presence of humans, each interaction, no matter how small, setting off waves of consequence. Her mind kept returning to one thought: the Loresians were right, the plants weren't just reacting to humanity's presence on the planet. They were pushing back, actively trying to eliminate human influence, as if they'd learned the lesson from previous attempts to colonize. It wasn't a random occurrence, like a hurricane or an earthquake. It was an ecosystem-wide defense mechanism. And Ellie had unwittingly triggered it. The next day, Ellie stood outside the base's research station, her breath clouding in the cool morning air. She looked out across the valley, where a line of trees grew, their leaves glistening under the early sunlight. She could see the outline of the city in the distance, the sleek human buildings rising from the soil, their sharp angles a stark contrast to the curves of the natural landscape. Behind her, the other members of the expedition worked quietly, conducting their routine checks and trying to salvage what remained of their equipment. The mood was somber. The once optimistic scientists were now weighed down by the undeniable truth that their survival here on this alien planet was anything but guaranteed. "Ellie, we need to talk," came the voice of Aaron Walker, the lieutenant who had been guarding her during the plant incident. His voice was hoarse, like he hadn't slept in days. He stepped into view, his face drawn, as if the tension of the last few days had already worn him down. He didn't wait for a response, just looked at her with a kind of grim urgency. Ellie sighed and nodded. "Yeah, I know. I don't think any of us are sleeping much these days." Aaron glanced over his shoulder, checking to make sure no one else was within earshot. "You're right, we're all on edge. But I'm not talking about sleep. I'm talking about what's coming. The Loresians, they're not going to let this go." Ellie's stomach dropped. "I know. They already warned us. But what can we do?" Aaron stepped closer, lowering his voice. "We have to make them listen. Maybe we can find a way to communicate with them. A way to show them we're not here to destroy the planet. Maybe we can appeal to their sense of survival, show them that Earth's situation is just as dire as theirs was centuries ago. Ellie felt a wave of exhaustion wash over her. She hadn't slept more than a few hours at a time in the past few days, and it was starting to catch up with her. Still, Aaron had a point. The Loresians weren't all-powerful gods. They were a species trying to survive just like humans were. Maybe there was a way to bridge the gap, but how? After all, the Loresians had made their position crystal clear. There was no room for negotiation. Either the humans left, or they'd face the full wrath of the planet's ecological defense systems. And from what Ellie had seen firsthand, those defenses weren't just impressive, they were terrifying. She ran a hand through her hair, pulling herself from her spiraling thoughts. I don't think we can just talk our way out of this, Aaron. This is more than a misunderstanding. These plants are part of an entire system. If the Loresians want us gone, I don't think we'll be able to stop them with diplomacy. We can try, Aaron insisted, his eyes hardening with resolve. We have to try something. Ellie felt the weight of the situation settle deeper into her bones. Okay, she said, her voice steadied despite the turmoil inside. Let's talk to the Loresians. But we need to go in with a plan. If we show weakness or fear, they'll know we're not serious. Aaron gave a curt nod, and they both turned toward the research station. Ellie's mind was racing, trying to devise a way forward. She could feel the pressure of the clock ticking louder in her ears. Every minute that passed without a resolution only pushed them closer to a point of no return. By the time the sun was setting that evening, Ellie, Aaron, and a small team of representatives had gathered in a secure meeting room. The Loresian envoy, led by Leora, had agreed to meet them, but only under strict conditions. The humans would not be allowed any weapons, and the meeting would take place in neutral territory, far from the settlements. The room was sterile and clinical, unlike the vibrant, organic beauty of the planet outside. Ellie stood near the large, transparent window, staring out at the distant city lights flickering in the dimming light. She felt small in this moment. Small and vulnerable. Not for the first time, she wished they had never come to Porteus. Aaron cleared his throat, pulling her from her thoughts. You ready for this? He asked, his voice low. Ellie nodded, though she didn't feel ready at all. I have to be. For everyone's sake. Minutes passed before the door slid open, and a shadow entered the room. The figure was tall, angular, and radiated an otherworldly glow. Leora. She stepped forward, her translucent skin shimmering like liquid silver, her eyes as vast and empty as the stars themselves. We meet again, Dr. Marlowe, Leora said, her voice resonating deep within Ellie's mind, as though the words were not spoken aloud but communicated directly. And you bring others. What is it that you hope to accomplish with this meeting? Ellie steadied herself, trying to suppress the tremor in her voice. We're here to find a way to coexist. We know what your people are capable of. We know the planet is reacting to our presence. But we're not here to conquer, Leora. We're not here to destroy. We're here because Earth is dying. We need a place to survive. Just like you did. Just like your ancestors did. Leora's gaze seemed to pierce through her, weighing every word. For a long time, the room was silent except for the hum of the base's energy systems. Ellie could feel the weight of Leora's scrutiny, and it was like an invisible pressure pressing down on her chest. Finally, the Loresian spoke. You say you seek survival. Yet your presence here is not merely for survival, is it? You bring with you your tools of expansion, your systems of exploitation. You believe that by controlling the resources of this planet, you will solve your problems. But that is not survival. That is the same destruction that has followed your kind throughout the galaxy. Ellie felt a cold chill spread through her. Leora wasn't wrong. She had known, deep down, that this mission wasn't just about survival. It was about rebuilding humanity's empire one colony at a time. But they didn't have the luxury of time, of resources. They had to try something. We don't want to repeat the same mistakes, Ellie said, her voice softer now, pleading. We know what happened to your people. We don't want to be like those who came before us. We don't want to destroy. We just need a chance. A chance to learn, to adapt. We're willing to do whatever it takes to prove we're not here to harm. For a long moment, Leora said nothing. She simply stared at Ellie, her eyes unreadable. Finally, she spoke again, her voice almost imperceptible. You think you can change your nature? Perhaps that is your greatest mistake. Ellie's heart sank. Then what do you want from us? What will it take for us to prove we can coexist? Leora's gaze softened, but only slightly. You must leave this planet. The ecosystems of Porteus are delicate, and your presence has already caused irreversible damage. You cannot stay here without eventually breaking the balance of life. Ellie's breath caught. But we can't just leave. Where would we go? Earth is dying. Yes, we know. Leora's voice was still, calm. But your actions here will only hasten its end. You will be as parasites, draining the life from the very planet that sustains you. The balance must be restored. Ellie knew what that meant. The Loresians weren't interested in a negotiation. They had already decided. And the next steps they took would be drastic. There was no peaceful resolution, no second chance. The war, if it wasn't already here, was coming. And humanity had only one choice left, fight or flee. Ellie's heart was pounding now, each beat louder than the last. Leora's words hung in the air, a cold, bitter reality that Ellie hadn't been ready to face. The planet wasn't just indifferent to humanity's presence, it was actively rejecting them. The Loresians had decided, and there was no room for negotiation. We can't just leave, Ellie said, her voice rising, despite her efforts to remain calm. We have nowhere to go. Earth is uninhabitable, and we've already begun settling here. You can't expect us to just turn around and abandon everything we've worked for. Leora's eyes were unreadable, the cool glow of her skin casting an eerie light in the otherwise sterile room. You are stubborn, Dr. Marlowe. You seek to understand the planet and its systems, yet you fail to see that you are not welcome here. The balance of life is delicate, and it is not yours to disrupt. Your presence here only accelerates the damage to your own species and to the ecosystems of Porteus. You must leave. Ellie's throat tightened as the gravity of the situation sank in. She could feel the weight of it pressing down on her chest, suffocating her. She couldn't believe they were at this point. Everything they had worked for, everything she had dreamed of, was slipping away, like sand through her fingers. The Loresians weren't just shutting down their hopes for a new home, they were actively working against them. Aaron stepped forward, his face set in hard lines. What if we agree to change? To adapt to the planet, instead of trying to conquer it? We've seen your technology, your methods. You could teach us how to coexist, how to reverse the damage we've done. His voice was rough, but he spoke with the kind of conviction that only someone who had nothing left to lose could muster. We're not asking for permission to stay. We're begging for a chance. Leora tilted her head slightly, her eyes flickering with something that could have been curiosity, but her expression remained unreadable. You believe you can change. But you are mistaken. Your kind does not change. It repeats the same mistakes, over and over. You destroy. You consume. You expand until there is nothing left. Ellie wanted to argue, to point out all the ways they had changed, all the strides they had made. But deep down, she knew that Leora was right. Human history was filled with examples of colonization, exploitation, and destruction. And now, here they were again, on the brink of a new planet, trying to do the same thing to a place that wasn't ready to give up its resources. There had to be another way. But what? You're wrong, Ellie said, her voice quieter now, but firm. We're not like that anymore. We've learned. We understand the consequences of what we've done. We've seen Earth die, and we don't want to make the same mistakes here. You don't have to trust us, but you have to give us a chance to prove we can live here without destroying it." Leora's gaze softened, just slightly. "And if you fail? What then? Will you destroy Porteus as you destroyed Earth?" Ellie's breath hitched. "No. We won't. I swear it." For a long moment, there was silence. Ellie held her breath, waiting for the Loresian to speak, to make a decision that would either end everything or offer a sliver of hope. Finally, Leora's voice broke the silence. "You will have your chance. But it will not be easy. There are tests. Challenges you must face. If you succeed, perhaps there is a way for your kind to remain. But if you fail, if you show that you are incapable of respecting this planet's balance, then you will be removed. And we will not hesitate to use the full force of our technology to ensure that you leave." Ellie's heart skipped a beat. It wasn't the victory she had hoped for, but it was something. A chance. A fragile one, but a chance nonetheless. "Thank you," Ellie said, her voice thick with emotion. "We won't let you down." Leora nodded once, her figure fading slightly as if the light around her were dimming. "We shall see." With that, she turned and glided toward the door, her steps as silent as a shadow. The door slid open and closed behind her, leaving Ellie and Aaron alone in the room. Aaron let out a breath, as if he had been holding it the entire time. "Well, that's something. Not the outcome I expected, but something." Ellie wiped a hand across her face, trying to gather her thoughts. The weight of the decision was already beginning to sink in. This wasn't just a test of survival, it was a test of everything humanity had learned. Every mistake, every act of greed, every failure to protect Earth's fragile ecosystems had led them here. And now, they were being given an opportunity to make it right. But what if they failed? She shook her head, trying to push the fear away. They couldn't fail. Earth's future depended on them. They had to prove they could change. The days that followed were filled with tension. The team was divided. Some were hopeful, believing that the Loresians' offer was genuine, that there was a chance for reconciliation. Others, like Dr. Carl Jenkins, the lead engineer on the mission, were skeptical. He believed the Loresians were simply toying with them, giving them a false hope before pulling the rug out from under their feet. "Do you really think they'll let us stay?" Carl asked Ellie one evening, his face tired, his brow furrowed in frustration. "They've already made it clear they see us as a threat. The only reason they'd give us a chance is to watch us fail." Ellie didn't have an answer for him. She wanted to believe that they could change, that they could prove they were different, but a small part of her couldn't help but wonder if Carl was right. What if they were doomed to repeat the same mistakes, even here, on this new planet? But she couldn't afford to entertain doubt, not now, not when the stakes were so high. They had been given a chance. And she would do everything in her power to make sure they didn't squander it. That night, Ellie sat alone in her quarters, staring out the small window at the distant horizon. The sky was darkening, the stars flickering above, and she couldn't shake the feeling that something was coming. Something worse than what they had already faced. In the distance, she saw movement silhouettes that appeared to be heading toward the base. She stood quickly, her heart pounding. What was this? Had the Loresians come back? Had they decided to escalate things? She rushed to the communications panel, keying in a message to Aaron. "We've got company. You need to check this out." The message sent. Seconds passed, each one feeling like an eternity. Finally, the reply came. "On my way. Stay put. I'll be there in 5. Ellie nodded to herself, then rushed to the observation deck, scanning the horizon for any sign of what was coming. The figures in the distance were moving fast, and from their speed, it was clear they weren't just normal wildlife or even a team of settlers. Her stomach twisted with a sense of dread. They had only just received their chance. And now it felt like the clock was ticking faster than ever before. When Aaron arrived, he was already suited up, his rifle slung across his back. The two of them stood side by side, looking out at the growing shapes in the distance. "What the hell is that?" Aaron muttered, his voice laced with disbelief. "They're not human." Ellie swallowed hard. "No, they're not. And I don't think they're here for a friendly chat." As the figures drew closer, Ellie's pulse quickened. They were unlike any species she had ever seen. Tall and thin, with skin that shimmered like the surface of a dark lake, their movements were fluid, almost unnatural. They weren't Loresians, but they were clearly not human either. "Get ready," Ellie whispered, her hand inching toward the emergency comms panel. Something told her this wasn't the test the Loresians had promised. This was the beginning of something far worse. The figures in the distance moved with an eerie precision, like predators closing in on their prey. Ellie's instincts kicked into overdrive, and every muscle in her body tensed. She could feel her pulse thumping in her throat, each beat carrying the weight of the moment. These weren't settlers or any kind of human contingent. They were something else entirely. Aaron's voice was low, his words barely a whisper. "They're coming too fast. We're not ready." Ellie didn't answer. She couldn't afford to waste time with words. There was only one thing she knew for certain: they were not here to talk. The figures, tall and impossibly slender, glided closer, their movements almost hypnotic in their fluidity. The light from the base reflected off their skin, which had an unnatural sheen, as though it absorbed the very light around it. As they neared the edge of the clearing, Ellie's heart dropped. They weren't just walking, they were floating. Their feet hovered just above the ground, like they didn't need to touch it at all. They were completely silent, their steps absorbed by the soft grass beneath them. Ellie's first thought was that these weren't Loresians. These were something else entirely. But the more she observed, the more she felt a sense of deep, primal unease. The way they moved, so perfectly synchronized, so unearthly, reminded her of the reports she had read about the ancient races that the Loresians spoke of. The ones who had once ruled the galaxy, before they retreated into obscurity. She glanced at Aaron, who was already scanning the area, his hand on the trigger of his rifle. The last thing they needed right now was a fight, but he knew as well as she did that these things weren't here for a peaceful meeting. The figures continued to approach, their forms becoming more distinct in the growing darkness. Their faces were smooth, with no visible features, just an expanse of flawless skin that seemed to shimmer with the light of distant stars. There was no sign of eyes, no mouth. No way to communicate, at least not in a way that humans understood. "Stay quiet," Ellie whispered to Aaron. "We don't know who they are or what they want." Aaron nodded, but his grip tightened around his weapon. The tension between them was palpable, thick enough to cut through. They were outmatched. Outnumbered. The figures were drawing nearer, and Ellie could feel a growing dread in the pit of her stomach. Suddenly, one of the figures stopped moving. It hovered in place for a long, breathless moment, as though it were observing them, gauging their reactions. Ellie's mind raced. Could it sense their fear? Or was it just calculating the best way to engage? "Ellie," Aaron's voice was barely audible, tinged with the kind of fear that only comes when you don't understand the enemy. "Do you think the Loresians sent them?" "I don't know." Her voice was tight. "But I don't think they're here to negotiate." The figure in front of them took a step forward, the air around it rippling with an unnatural force, as though its presence was altering the very fabric of reality. It raised a hand, long, delicate fingers that shimmered like liquid silver in the pale light, and pointed directly at them. Ellie froze. It wasn't a gesture of peace. It was a command. The figure was asserting dominance, showing them that it held the power, that it was in control. Before Ellie could react, the ground beneath them trembled. The force of it nearly knocked her off her feet, sending a shockwave through the base. The air became thick, almost oppressive, as if the very atmosphere itself was being manipulated by some unseen force. "Get down!" Aaron shouted, grabbing her arm and pulling her toward cover. The two of them ducked behind a large metal structure, just as the shockwave hit with full force, rattling the entire base and causing sparks to fly from the communication panels. The figures moved again, their actions smooth and deliberate. They weren't walking now. They were floating, hovering just above the ground, their bodies casting long, eerie shadows against the backdrop of the base. The tremors in the ground continued, as if some great power was at play just beneath the surface. Ellie could hear the hum of the energy around them, the air thick with a strange vibration. She realized, too late, that they weren't just making a dramatic entrance, they were asserting their control over the environment itself. Do you think they're attacking? Ellie hissed to Aaron, trying to keep her voice low. They're not attacking yet, he muttered. His hand was still on his weapon, but he wasn't sure what good it would do. This wasn't something they could fight with conventional weapons. The figures weren't human. They weren't even really physical, at least not in the way Ellie understood it. They moved through the air as if it were water, like the very molecules were bending to their will. One of the figures floated closer to the base, its long arms outstretched. As it moved, the very ground beneath its feet seemed to twist and distort, as though the earth was bending to its will. Ellie's eyes widened as the energy in the air increased, the tension building to an unbearable level. She could feel the hairs on the back of her neck stand on end. This was no ordinary attack. This was something else entirely. Aaron's hand gripped her shoulder. "We need to get out of here," he said urgently, his voice filled with an urgency that Ellie had never heard before. He was a soldier, a man who had seen his share of battle, but even he was afraid of what was happening now. Ellie shook her head. "We can't just run. We need to figure out who they are, what they want." Before she could say anything else, one of the figures turned sharply, its gaze, or what Ellie presumed to be a gaze, settling on her. It was like it could see straight through her, as if it knew exactly who she was, what she was thinking, and why she was standing there. A voice, cold, distant, yet somehow clear, echoed in her mind, "You are the humans who seek to disrupt the balance. You bring chaos to a world that was never meant for you." Ellie's breath caught in her throat, the weight of the words crushing her chest. She had heard voices in her mind before, through the Loresians' telepathic communications, but this was different. This wasn't the kind of warning they'd received from Leora. This was something far older, far more ancient. "You do not belong here. You will leave, or we will make you." The voice faded, leaving only the crackling of the air around her. Ellie's mind was spinning. What had just happened? Were these beings the ancient race the Loresians had spoken of? Were they watching humanity? Judging them? What the hell was that? Aaron whispered, his voice a mixture of fear and disbelief. I think they just gave us an ultimatum," Ellie said, her voice trembling. "We leave, or they make us leave." But before she could say anything else, the ground shook again, this time even more violently. The entire base rattled as if it were being lifted from the earth, the structure groaning under the strain. Ellie stumbled, her balance thrown off as the entire compound seemed to tremble with unnatural force. Outside, the figures didn't move. They remained still, their forms suspended in the air, their presence like a weight pressing down on the entire planet. Ellie grabbed Aaron's arm. "We need to get to the control room. We need to," but before she could finish, a blast of energy tore through the sky above them, followed by a sound like thunder. The air shimmered with the heat of the blast, and Ellie felt a wave of intense pressure slam into her chest. She barely had time to react before the ground beneath her feet split open.